David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, let's do another one of these propaganda disinformation breakdowns where we look at a claim and explain why it is deceptive yet tricky and why it will often convince a lot of people into just poor, unfounded conclusions. Donald Trump is under fire for his recent pardons and clemency grants that he issued, including to people like Bernie Kerik, the former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, and others. And Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, recently tweeted, quote, "Dems are mad at Trump for abusing his pardon power. Total presidential pardons, sentence commutations." And then it lists Jimmy Carter had 566 and Reagan had 406. It says Obama had 1,927 and that Trump has only done 26 pardons and commutations. And Donald Trump Jr. goes on to say, "Please, by all means, educate me on abuse of power." So you look at this, and many Trumpists have, and they retweet it and they love it. And they say, look, there can't be anything wrong with Trump's pardons because he's done 26 and all these other presidents did way more. That's where you have to say, wait a second here. Let's apply some critical thinking. First of all, let's take on the quantity argument. Donald Trump has only pardoned 26 people right now. He's only in the middle of his first term. Presidents tend to issue pardons, not just at the end of their terms, but at the end of their presidencies. So when you look at totals, many presidents got the vast majority of their pardons and clemency grants in at the very end of their respective presidencies. And until we see what Donald Trump does in his last days or his last hours at the Oval Office, the comparison is not relevant. Number two, some of these numbers are very deceptive. So Barack Obama, the number is 1,927 to Donald Trump's 26. Well, in reality, Barack Obama pardoned 212 people, and then he commuted about 1,700 sentences. When you look at those commutations that Barack Obama did, a ton of them are drug offenders that Donald Trump has also previously said shouldn't be in prison and that he wants to go ahead and deal with. In July of 2015, Obama commuted 46 drug sentences. In June of 2016, Obama did another 42 drug sentence commutations. In December of 2016, during the Trump transition period, another 80 roughly. A few days before leaving office, another 64. On his last day in office, another 330. So not only can you not look at these numbers until a presidency is over, number one, the vast majority of the commutations from Barack Obama, which Don Jr. is apparently complaining about, are very similar to when Donald Trump himself pardoned Alice Johnson after Kim Kardashian lobbied him to do it. Alice Johnson had spent 21 years behind bars for a nonviolent drug offense. If pardoning people for nonviolent drug offense sentences is good, according to Trump, Don Jr. can't also say Obama's bad for doing the exact same thing. Trump here is pardoning corrupt criminals. Trump is laying the groundwork to pardon more of his own cronies. Trump is normalizing corruption and setting himself up to pardon Roger Stone and or Michael Flynn and whoever else. Obama had nothing to gain personally by commuting the sentences of drug offenders when he was on his way out of office, other than fighting the failed war on drugs in some small way. Trump has plenty to gain by normalizing corruption when he's planning to use that pardon power, presumably to get his own friends and cronies out of prison. So do not fall for these bogus arguments that sound good. Don Jr. does them on Twitter a lot. There's a guy whose name is Charlie Kirk, who's part of a right-wing, mostly like college-centered group called Turning Point USA. You see these tweets, and because they are so crafted to appear to be something they are not, it looks like, wow, checkmate, liberals. We can't even argue with that. Obama 1,900 and Trump only 26. No. You've got to look at the details. You have to understand what's not being said. You have to understand the hypocrisy and the double standards and the reality of these things to actually understand them. And you've got to give them credit. They are really good at bamboozling a lot of the people that support Donald Trump, part of it is they're bamboozleable people. Part of it is they are actually pretty good at it. And we've got to do what we can to try to pierce the echo chamber. Okay, so I interviewed the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, earlier this week. And one of the things that came up was Jordan saying, I don't care what you do, I'm socially liberal, but I'm fiscally conservative. And this actually makes no sense, and I want to discuss that with you today. Very often, the way that we hear about someone being socially liberal and fiscally conservative is they'll say something like, and I have many friends who say this, I want low regulation, I want low taxes, I don't care who gets married, and I think women should be allowed to choose abortion if it's what's right for them. Well, it sounds plausibly coherent. You're socially liberal and you're fiscally conservative. Well, the problem is if you're fiscally conservative, you almost always have a position that is terrible for the environment and for dealing with climate change. You might have social liberal fiscal conservatives, self-described, who agree that the science is right on climate change. They accept the science, I think is better said. But if you're economically or fiscally conservative, you're not going to deal with climate change almost by the very nature of what it means to be fiscally conservative. You need regulation to deal with climate change. Fiscal conservatism is against regulation under the guise of we're for small government. And it's a direct contradiction. It doesn't make sense. The free market, which fiscal conservatives pray at the altar of in many cases, will not solve the climate crisis. Socially liberal might mean you have empathy for the poor and you want to fix homelessness and deal with uninsured Americans who have no health insurance. Okay, great. But the problem is that fiscal conservatism believes in tax schemes that will not deal with the poor and with homelessness and getting everybody health care. You can't do it. It's a direct contradiction. You can say it, but it doesn't make it a logical thing. If you are fiscally conservative, you often repeat this idea, we've got to balance the budget. I'm a deficit hawk. We've got to reduce the deficit until a Republican is president. Then you often forget about it. But if absent any context, your priority is we've got to cut to reduce the deficit, you can't deal with the social issues that you claim to be liberal on. You just can't do it. So very often when you hear someone say, I'm a centrist or I'm a social liberal and fiscal conservative, you're really dealing with what's called a right-wing libertarian. These are essentially right-wingers who don't hate gay people, right? I mean, this is a gross oversimplification, but when I hear socially liberal, fiscally conservative, in practice, I hear I'm a right-winger, but I'm not interested in persecuting gay people. Another way to understand socially liberal and fiscally conservative is I really would love to fix the issues that are affecting the poor, marginalized, often minority, disenfranchised individuals, but I don't want the government to get involved, and definitely none of my tax money should go towards fixing those problems. It's not a very principled or coherent position. That's the reality. If you support these social rights, you have to have an economy that's going to provide and guarantee those rights. Otherwise, it's just nonsense. There's a lot of corporate CEOs that want to be relevant that take this approach. Sometimes they call it centrism. Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz is sort of one of those guys. He's a social progressive about non-discrimination in the workplace. He's for gay marriage, all of that stuff. But economically, he's essentially a standard neoliberal who is about free markets. He's suspicious of caricatures of socialism that float around, all of that stuff. Now, the other thing I will say is it's a very small group of people who actually are socially liberal and fiscally conservative, not when you say, hey, where do you fall on the political spectrum? When you do a proper poll or test where people are answering questions about their beliefs, the number of people that are actually socially liberal and fiscally conservative is very small. You poll people on the issues and you find in many studies, for example, one done by the Voter Study Group, whose results we're putting up on the screen, the area that is least common in this 4-quadrant system. So imagine a 4-box where you can be socially and economically liberal, you can be socially and economically conservative, or you can be a mix. The least common quadrant is socially liberal and economically conservative. It's actually far more common to be socially conservative but economically what we might call liberal in the more progressive sense. So even many of the people claiming that they are socially liberal and fiscally conservative actually aren't. But the more important analysis is that it's incoherent. If you are socially liberal and fiscally conservative, the fiscal conservatism essentially makes your social liberalness irrelevant beyond just you don't hate gay people. And again, it's a gross oversimplification, but it really illuminates the contradiction. If you aren't going to be pushing for regulating businesses in a way that makes sense, if you're not going to be pushing for economic justice policies, being socially liberal in some in name only way, I guess is what I'm saying, is not really worth much in terms of policy. If you disagree with me, let me know. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We are going to take some phone calls coming up. And later on, we are going to get back to this issue of the regulation of social networks and what should and shouldn't be part of that. That's coming up later, but much more right after this short break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Nancy Goetz and Vicky Kaufman. Nancy and Vicky, really appreciate your support. Join these great people by signing up at joinpakman.com. Very quick, very cheap, directly supports the show, and comes with great perks and benefits, including the commercial-free audio and video streams of the show, the daily members-only bonus show, and so much more. Also want to say thanks to today's longtime sustainer of the day. Tristan Harris has been a member for almost 5 years. Really appreciate your support, Tristan. Sign up in under a minute at joinpakman.com. Let's go to the phones at 617-830-4750 and see what's on people's minds, starting with our caller from the 401 area code. Who's calling today from 401?
Hey, David. My name's Kenny. How you doing?
Good, Kenny. How's it going?
I'm doing well. First-time caller, long-time listener. Recently picked up a membership.
Thank you.
Since you've been doing such great coverage of the primaries.
Appreciate it.
I wanted to call. So I'm actually out here at UC Berkeley. I'm a graduate student, and I'm sure you've heard about the strike that's going on in Santa Cruz.
Yes.
I wanted to get your take on it because I'm a pretty active member with the union here on campus, and as you know, this is a wildcat strike that isn't endorsed by the union officially, and for political reasons, I won't be putting in my 2 cents, but I want to get your take. Thanks.
You know, I just don't really know enough about the circumstances to be able to comment. I know that when I was an undergrad at the University of Massachusetts, there would very often be varieties of different types of either protests or strikes from the graduate student organizations or different groups. And I just feel like it would be inappropriate for me to really weigh in because I'm aware of it. I don't know all the circumstances. And I just don't think there's any benefit to me giving an uninformed opinion about something so specific.
So then can I ask you a more general question?
Sure.
Given what we've seen recently with big labor pushing back on things like Medicare for all and attacking the Sanders agenda because of some of the quote-unquote things that they fought for so far. What role do you think big labor has to play in something like this? Do you think that worker strikes can be effective without big labor? And where do you think that what do you think the University of California, I guess that's specific, so let's just stop there as far as big labor goes.
So I believe that it is completely incorrect to suggest that Medicare for all, as an example, is something that big labor, as you call it, should oppose because it takes out of the sort of negotiating package or what's under the umbrella of big labor to do for their union members. In fact, I saw an analysis that was different, which is if you take something like healthcare out of the negotiation for big labor because you have a Medicare for all program, big labor now can specifically know the number of dollars per employee that were previously being spent on health insurance and can argue that there should be raises, at least for some part of what that savings is. So I reject completely the idea that on principle, big labor should be opposed to something like Medicare for all. And I don't believe all big labor is. I mean, we heard from some unions that activated around that issue. But it has not been all of them. And I just don't buy that for a second. I think that that's a talking point meant to stifle support of progressive candidates. And it's a talking point meant to stifle support of Medicare for all.
Interesting. Yeah, David Dole had a similar, not completely the same take, but in a similar vein. So thanks. Last thing, where can I find the show being live streamed right now if I'm a member? Is that possible?
We don't stream the show live. The show is produced in the afternoon and then released a few hours later. So only like the evening live streams are actually available live. Kenny, thank you so much for the call. I appreciate hearing from you. Let's go next to our caller from the 760 area code. Caller from 760. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 760, we muted because we've got you on, but we can't hear you. 760, I heard something click. This will be the last opportunity. Are you there, 760? All right, 760 clearly having an issue. Sounded like we were muted. I heard like an unmute noise, and then alas, we had to get rid of the call. Let's go next to our caller from the 267 area code. Who's calling today from 267?
David?
Yes.
Hello. Hi, my name is Greg. I'm calling from Bucks County in Pennsylvania. I'm a big fan of your show.
Thanks, Greg.
A lot of my friends on the left are Bernie supporters, as I am. And but I'm getting very concerned about the idea of a Bloomberg candidacy, and I'm concerned that it will depress votes, and that we will end up with Trump again. I understand the arguments that he's a version of Trump. I also lived in New York for most of my life, and I lived through the Bloomberg mayorship. And I'm interested in what you have to say to Bernie supporters and people on the left who are getting disappointed about the idea of a possibility of a Bloomberg candidacy, and the idea that they might not vote. They might sit this out.
Sure.
And I'd love to hear what you say about all that.
I think I posted to my Twitter page a few days ago something like, I'm getting emails from some Democrats saying if Bloomberg's the nominee, they won't vote. Where are you guys on this? And I got like 6,000 replies from a lot of Democrats saying I won't vote if it's Bloomberg. And I totally understand that. I mean, in Bloomberg, you have a guy who represents a lot of different things. You have a guy who represents a possible sort of bailout for the establishment that may be seeing Joe Biden tank, and are unclear about Pete Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar doesn't really have support. If Bloomberg's really polling 15 nationally, maybe he's the guy to get behind. But then you have a voter turnout question, which you're bringing up. And the question is, if Bloomberg is the Democratic nominee, given that Bloomberg was a Republican for so long, given that Bloomberg's politics on a lot of social issues based on videos that have come out recently seem to not be particularly enlightened and progressive, to put it lightly, what is it going to do to turnout? And how will he fare against Donald Trump? My answer is I don't know. And the reason I say that is I get emails about polling that says, hey, you know what? In face-to-face matchups, Bloomberg does really well against Trump. And then I get other polling that says, hey, you know what? If Bloomberg's the nominee, that will keep the largest number of Democratic voters home. So I understand the idea that Bloomberg as the nominee might depress turnout. There are so many conflicting data points that I just don't have an answer about that right now. And all I can really say is if you support the policies of Bernie instead of Bloomberg, just go out and support Bernie now. And then if there's a different nominee, evaluate it and make a decision as to what's best at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's incredibly difficult. There's not even enough information yet. Tonight, it's going to be a whole different spin on this because of the debates, and of course, the mainstream media, MSNBC in particular, has been ridiculous, vicious in their anti-Bernie screeds.
Yes.
So yeah, it's going to be really. And one last question. If you had to vote right now and you had to choose between Trump and Bloomberg, how would you vote?
Yeah, I would vote for Bloomberg over Trump. And I know there's a lot of people saying there's no difference. It's just a richer version of Trump with a lot of the same ideas. The reasons why I would vote for Bloomberg over Trump are, number one, the Supreme Court choices Bloomberg would make would not be as bad as the ones Trump would make. Number two, Bloomberg
Absolutely.
actually has both sort of diplomatic and political experience that Trump lacks, which is the source of a lot of Donald Trump's missteps. That would be number two. And then number three, although it would be no great party if Bloomberg were president, Bloomberg would restore some of the respect from world leaders that we have lost under Trump, although certainly not all. So for me, I wouldn't be cheering about voting for Bloomberg over Trump, but I would definitely vote Bloomberg over Trump.
Yeah, thank you, David. I really appreciate your opinion, and I'm a great fan of the show. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Really appreciate hearing from you. Thank you so much. Let's go next to our caller from the 619 area code. Who's calling today from 619?
I think it's me. Can you hear me?
Yes. Who's this?
Oh my goodness. I have the biggest pleasure of ever meeting you. My name's Leslie Valerie.
Your name's Valerie?
Yes.
Valerie, what's
Leslie
going on?
Valerie is my name.
Okay.
And I'm so happy to finally meet you. I've been watching you since I can't even tell you when. I have a question regarding, for example, I have so many questions, but you are a journalist, and I started watching you way back then, right? But did you already have a degree, like, to be a journalist, or did you just start going out and, like, do things on your own, like the way that you have been now on YouTube?
I started the show when I was 21 in college, so I was not working in media at the time that I started the show.
That is so amazing. So then how did you learn all the things that you've learned? How is it now that you get to go and interview and, like, have these amazing things that you do? How did you do it?
It's a lot of learn by doing. You just, each day you try to do it a little bit better, a lot of reading, a lot of practice. It's been a learn on the job sort of thing for me.
What resources, like, for example, me, I don't really have much money right now, and I'm not really technically employed, but I really would love to do things like this, for, like how you get to interview and stuff. How can I get my foot in the door just to do this type of stuff, like, on anything though? Like, there's so many things that we still don't know about. For example, like, you know how they slightly mention things about the drug crisis, homelessness. They do mention it on the news, but it's kind of slight. And I feel like we should get to know more the deeper problems of how one thing is correlated with the other. So certain social problems are just not on the news as they should be, and therefore I feel like politicians don't talk about it as much as they should be, and therefore there's no priority to these type of issues that are actually there every day in our life.
Yes, and the question was, how can you get involved in media?
And like, yeah, as a citizen, like, say, like me, I'm broke. How can someone like me who is broke, how can I just volunteer or give my time and learn? I just want to be able to do this.
Right. Well, two options. The way I started was at a community radio station in Massachusetts, where you just show up and they often have sliding scale fees where you can just start learning and it doesn't cost you anything. So look to see if there's a community radio station in your area. But the great thing about I'm guessing you have a phone since you're calling me on the phone, you can even use your phone to start citizen journalism and citizen activism. So fortunately, the barriers to entry have been drastically reduced. And it's an exciting time. Valerie, I so appreciate the call, and I hope to hear from you again. Great to hear from you. Let's go next to our caller from the 505 area code. Who's calling today from 505?
Hey, David. This is Isaiah from Albuquerque.
Hey, Isaiah.
Hey, I actually just had a quick question in regards to my prediction, and definitely hope, is that Bernie takes the primary. But if he ends up going up against Trump in the general election and ends up losing, I'm curious how progressives might refocus strategically in future elections, or how you think something like that would affect political strategy for the progressive left.
Well, we talked about this on a segment a few weeks ago where I laid out how if you kind of game out the different scenarios, Bernie is the nominee and wins, Bernie is the nominee and loses, a centrist is the nominee and wins, or a centrist is the nominee and loses. If Bernie is the nominee and loses to Trump, not only will Republicans say this is a rejection of left social democracy, even the centrist Democratic Party will say this has been a rejection of centrist, of left social democracy, and we should never again elect someone like Bernie to be the nominee in the first place. So I think that until it happens, we're not really going to know the repercussions. But there is no doubt that, so if Bernie fails to be the nominee, then you will have the Democratic Party saying, see, we told you that those ideas weren't viable to be the nominee. If Bernie is the nominee but loses to Trump, they will say, see, we told you that even if the Democratic Party selected Bernie as the nominee, that these ideas would lose to Trump nationally. So no matter what, they are going to react in that way. The specific way in which it'll happen is we're sort of in a wait and see on that.
Definitely. Do you believe that it would show any sort of out of touchness, so to speak, from the left if Bernie loses, in the sense that there's a real big platform that it's grassroots, diverse, and it's really what the people want as far as policy go. But maybe it would just be enlightening in some sense and expose some sort of misunderstandings that we might have of the U.S. populace as a whole.
Well, the thing you have to remember is when half the country doesn't vote, you can have policies that are popular with 75% of the country, but based on who chooses to go out and vote for and against the policies, they might only be represented, say, 45% at the ballot box, even though they might represent 75% of all Americans. And so it's tricky and dangerous to extrapolate too much from that because half the country or 45% of the country doesn't even vote.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, unfortunately. But, well, thank you for taking my questions, David. I'm a big fan.
Thanks, Isaiah. Hope to hear from you again. Let's take a quick break. We are going to take more calls right after this short break. So if you're currently holding, please don't hang up because we are getting right back to the calls momentarily.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Let's go back to the phones at 617-830-4750 with our caller from the 703 area code. Who's calling today from 703?
Wait, is that me?
Yes, it is.
Oh, it's me?
Yes, it is.
Just a second. Hi, I'm Amelia. I've been watching your show for a while. I'm 16 years old, and I'm just wondering if you think that the current media, sorry, it's just really loud in here. I was wondering if you think that the way that politics are done these days with more like personal attacks and more glamour and showmanship, if that makes young people like more apathetic or more like passionate about, sorry, it's really loud in here. If you think that, I wonder if you think that modern politics is like damaging to young people or like makes them more interested and passionate and want to fix things. I don't know.
I would actually need to hear from you about that. I mean, when I see the way that politics has been turned into a reality show, we have a reality show president. Their last State of the Union was essentially a reality show event with, you know, secret guests coming out unannounced and medals and prizes and all sorts of stuff. I find it absolutely disgusting and despicable. But I mean, you tell me, Amelia, if you're 16, are you finding that you are drawn in by this sort of reality show politics, or do you find it distasteful?
I think that it makes kids my age pretty either apathetic or more passionate. I think there's because I think kids younger than me might see this and start thinking of politics as like a game. And I certainly know some of my classmates do, but it just kind of makes me disgusted, and I want better because I wasn't politically, like, didn't know anything during the entire Obama administration. He got elected when I was like, I don't know, 5.
Right.
So, yeah, and I didn't know anything about Bush or before, so me coming into becoming aware of the world and becoming aware of the world and aware of politics and policy, and then learning history as well at the same time, it kind of makes it seem like it's always been this way. Just maybe
it has
not.
Not. It is not. And I know that
open.
it's hard to understand that, because we, in our lifetime, we only observe a certain number of political cycles, and it can be very easy to feel like the way things are the way that it's always been. I mean, I can even tell you just in the elections that I've observed, like when I was in high school, George W. Bush was elected for the first time. Things are very different now than they were. In some senses, they are the same, but in some senses, they're very, very different. Listen, it's great that you're politically engaged. It sounds crazy where you are, Amelia, so I'm going to let you go, all right? But I hope you'll call back again.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right,
Bye.
good. Thank you so much. Great to hear from Amelia, just very, very loud wherever she was. Let's go next to our caller from the 503 area code. Who's calling today from 503?
Hey, David, this is Warren from Portland, Oregon. Big
Hey,
fan.
How are you?
Hey there, good. Hey, so recently Rush Limbaugh mentioned that Trump he referred to him as like Mr. Man. And it's become so troubling how so many people, I mean, mainly the base, has seen masculinity and Trump as this epitome of manhood.
Yeah.
And that fuels their judgments towards those that aren't as manlike, I guess. The snowflake line and all that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, though, I'm just curious about your opinion. There's this movement of LGBT and kind of an awakening of what is masculine and feminine. And I'm wondering, like, how you see it kind of coming out in politics, because it's coming out, I think, in media a lot faster. The allowance of such definitions, broadened definitions of masculinity and femininity. But how do you see it coming out in the political world, which I don't know nearly enough?
I feel like the way that it's coming out is extremely stratified. So what I mean by that is the following. Take somebody like Barack Obama. Now, stereotypes around black men are often about, hyper masculine, hyper sexualized, often in society, including in portrayals in media. Often there are, allusions to the black man as more likely to become violent. And, we've studied all this stuff academically about portrayals of black men. Now, at the same time, Barack Obama is a very well-educated, the type of person that fits much more into sort of, to use the arbitrary dichotomy of the fighter versus the lover. Barack Obama far more fits into the idea of the lover, the thinker, whatever. If you look at, his relationships with other people, how he interacts with his kids and whatever. Whereas Donald Trump, in many ways, is portrayed and seen by his supporters as kind of the epitome of the alpha male. And I do think that some of these roles are changing, because there's a huge swath of society where when they see Barack Obama, not a guy likely to get into the types of, for lack of a better term, pissing matches that Donald Trump gets himself into, not the type of guy to make the types of threats that Donald Trump makes. For a huge part of America, that is seen as the adult in charge in the room way to behave, where Donald Trump, despite checking a lot of the stereotypical boxes of the alpha male, threats, loud, boisterous, pushing his way around to get to the front of the picture with the world leaders, insulting people, all of this stuff. Donald Trump, in reality, is very much the snowflake that the right likes to portray many on the left to be. So I think the answer to your question in a very long-winded way is it depends who you ask. For a huge part of the American electorate, those old standards of alpha versus beta and masculinity still persist. And a lot of those people are supporting Donald Trump. There's a whole other world out there, because we have a country that is so divided culturally as much as it is politically, where those norms have drastically changed. And I think that that's a very good thing.
Yeah, it seems like it's I hate to stereotype, but it seems like the Democrats are pushing an open-mindedness, and the Republicans are holding on to a closed-mindedness. Maybe I can call some other time and ask, but what are the Republicans here to teach us? I mean, it can't be that one-sided, or is it?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Like it seems like I feel as a Democrat, I'm part of a group of people who are evolving to a place where we're teaching the Republicans about compassion and what real manhood is.
Yes.
What power is. It's not insulting, it's compassion. It looks maybe snowflakey, but it's actually strength.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't know that they're getting it. I think some of them maybe are.
But I'm wondering, is it that one-sided in a good way? I think where we are here to kind of help others get it. But that sounds a little self-righteous. Just me.
It's not totally one-sided.
Is there something the Republicans
it's not totally one-sided, but
teach us?
at the national level, I think that it is very one-sided in terms of the messages we get in media. I think in practice, there are plenty of people who are, for low taxes, who also are just as empathetic and comfortable with sort of more modern understandings of masculinity than what we see represented by Republicans at the national level. Very important topic, and I hope to talk about it again. Really appreciate the phone call. Very, very nice to hear from you. Let's check in with our caller from the 815 area code. Who's calling today from 815?
Hi, this is Jonathan from Rockford, Illinois.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hi. I just had a quick question about, so considering the current state of our political climate, particularly with the DNC, trying to rally against Bernie, and obviously the ideological differences with from Republicans with Democrats, would you see, hypothetically, if Bernie was to become president, do you think his term would even be successful, considering that there's so many people going against him, both on the left and right? And so his policies of Medicare for all, universal education, all that, would he even be successful in trying to convince other people to sign on to that, even if he were to be president?
Well, when I've talked about this before in the context of healthcare, I was absolutely crushed by a huge portion of the Bernie supporters in my audience. And remember, I'm voting for Bernie in the primary. No, you're absolutely right, which is that if it's Bernie versus Trump, Bernie's the right choice, and we vote for Bernie, and hopefully Bernie wins and he gets as much done as possible, and he will get some things done. But when you have a significant part of the Democratic Senate not in favor of Medicare for all, when you have the filibuster, when you have all of these other things, of course Bernie's not going to get everything done that he promises, and that's no different than any candidate. Every candidate has. Trump was going to do a wall. He was going to do new health care. He was going to eliminate the deficit and eventually pay off the debt. He's not doing any of that stuff. Now, those things were completely unrealistic to begin with. But needless to say, it wouldn't be a new thing that someone is brought into office and their ambition is bigger than what they can accomplish. That is a perfectly realistic and sensible thing to talk about. The question, though, is what can we get done, and making sure that that we do it. But you're completely right. Anybody who argues that you're being a defeatist is being completely unrealistic.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I don't think that you have to be realistic, especially right now. You got to take your victories where you can, and so I totally agree. And I also wanted to ask obviously with the rise of Bloomberg, and his he's been the mayor of New York and he has some political experience. But for someone like Trump or, Tom Steyer, do you think it's time, and I know this probably would never happen, but that we update qualifications for the presidency that involve maybe having some type of political experience, holding some type of office, or, just maybe updating what we have already?
No, I don't. So first of all, it would be very difficult to add new requirements, but I don't think that political experience should be required. I would like it if the electorate was more informed about, if you lack political experience, what other sort of experience would be a good replacement. I don't think being a reality show host and using your dad's money to still run a business that goes bankrupt a bunch of times, that doesn't qualify for me. But I wouldn't want to add more requirements. The only things I would consider adding are, maybe we should have presidential candidates, major party presidential candidates, undergo a full cognitive assessment. And I think that particularly this presidency has made relevant. But no, I wouldn't add more requirements about, I don't believe it would be constitutional, and it would be very, very difficult to achieve. And I don't think it's the right thing either.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right. Well, those are all my questions. So thank you, David.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate the phone call very, very much. That is going to do it for today. I do apologize. I wasn't able to get to everyone, but it is great that there are more people calling in than the number that I can get to, because otherwise it would be very, very sad. We will take calls again. We will take a quick break, and then I will be back with much more right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, let's do audience questions for the week. There are some good ones this week. Remember to send me yours. First question, David, you've talked about how good the Trump presidency has been for progressive media and for the David Pakman Show. What would be more profitable for your show, a Trump second term or a Bernie presidency? So the answer to this essentially comes down to why we think the Trump presidency has been so good for the David Pakman Show. And I've said before, by the way, I talk with progressive hosts all the time. We all recognize that the Trump presidency has coincided with some of the biggest growth for all of our respective programs that we've seen. I don't know of any of us, I speak for myself only, but I don't know of anyone who is planning to vote for Trump because it's been profitable for our respective shows. So the reason I believe that the Trump presidency has been so good for our show is not because of the opportunity to do cartoonish stories about the wacky things Trump does, although there have certainly been many of those opportunities. I believe that the Trump presidency has been good for independent progressive media because so many more people have become engaged in politics than ever before. When you looked at the Women's March and how so many of the people in November, December, January, 2016, 2017 were going out there on the street and protesting, a lot of those people are people who had never been politically active before. And for the same reason, I believe that that is what has been so great for programs like ours, that there are more people who care about what's going on politically. There are more people who understand the importance of paying attention to what's going on in the world around you, and hopefully people who are planning to vote in November, right? I mean, that's what's hopefully at the tail end of it. So on that basis, of course, if Bernie's the president instead of Trump, there are not going to be constant stories about how Trump embarrassed himself yet again in front of a group of 20 leaders around from the world, from world countries, and they're not even talking to him. He's not even being invited to climate stuff. That will change instantly with Bernie Sanders. You won't have any of that. But I do believe that a Bernie Sanders presidency would inspire a whole generation of new activists who now see an opportunity to really participate and catalyze and be part of the change that they want to see to our infrastructure, to our core systems, healthcare, education, the economy, et cetera, that I actually think a Bernie presidency would also be very, very good for programs that have aligned with social democracy and many of the ideas of Bernie Sanders for a decade at this point in time. So, sometimes people will jokingly or half jokingly say to me, hey, aren't you worried if Trump doesn't get reelected that, it's not going to be good for your show? No, I'm not. I'm actually not. I mean, if I had to say what would be the worst business-wise for the show, it would probably be some kind of centrist Democrat or Republican, right? Like, I think if the president is Mitt Romney, I don't know that it's that good for independent media, particularly after Donald Trump, where a lot of people will say and feel, wow, we got out of that really crazy thing. The bad things Mitt Romney would do just don't even rate compared to some of the bad things that Donald Trump did. I don't think that would be particularly good for the show. At the same time, some kind of centrist left establishment Democrat probably would also not be great for the show, in that there will be a lot of people kind of disillusioned and feeling like, well, we got someone that's kind of on our side, but not really. But is it really worth, after everything with Trump getting super active now? I don't know. That's not my view, but that's my sense of what the big picture will be. So I think if Trump's reelected, I think it will be very good for the program's continued growth. I think if Bernie Sanders gets elected, I think it will be very good for progressive independent media, that have been advocating for the policies that Bernie would try to put in place for 10 years. I think that will also be very good. And in the end, I don't think about any of this stuff when I think about who to vote for. I just think about whose policies are like mine or closest to mine. That's who I go and vote for in the primary. And then when it comes time for the general, I again make the evaluation of the people that are running. Who do I think would be best for the country? Next question today is, David, so in the end, should Michael Bloomberg be allowed into the Democratic presidential debates? So I've said this before. The DNC created their rules for getting into the debates. And if they want to live by those rules, they have to die by those rules, unless they simply change them to let Michael Bloomberg in. And they've changed them. And the big change is that the donor requirements have been eliminated for upcoming debates. And indeed, Michael Bloomberg may get into, and by the time you even watch this clip, it's possible he may have already qualified for one of the upcoming Democratic debates. So it depends on how you ask this question. If you ask me, is this a calculated establishment move to try to give another more centrist Democrat? He's been a lifelong Republican, but okay, he's a Democrat now and he's a centrist Democrat at that. The idea is put someone else in there who might be able to deny a progressive the presidency, who might be able to split the delegate counts such that nobody wins 50% plus one delegates on the first round of voting at the DNC, such that super delegates then come in and they can pick whoever they want. Then if that's the framing, then the answer is no. This is another way that the DNC is putting their thumb on the scale against progressive candidates in a Democratic primary. If you simply say to me, if someone's polling third around 14-15%, should they be in the debates? The answer is like, well, yeah, they should, right? I mean, when we talk about people continuing to say Andrew Yang never should have canceled his campaign, we want his voice at the debate. We want more voices at the debates. We want Tulsi's voice, despite the fact that she has not a path to a single delegate. If you want more voices, even if you don't like them, right? It can't be out of personal bias. It has to really be, you want more voices. How do you say the guy who's polling third nationally right now shouldn't be in the debates? So I simultaneously recognize that the entire Bloomberg thing is people who are desperate to prevent a progressive from being nominated, who are seeing Biden falter and Buttigieg maybe become the establishment choice, but he's still got issues and Amy Klobuchar doesn't seem to. There is a desperation for maybe Bloomberg could come in and pick this entire thing up, or at least deny a progressive the nomination. That's terrible. I hate that. If you say someone's in third place, should they be on the stage? The answer is like, yeah, they should. They should be on the stage. And if their ideas are bad, they should be exposed as bad on the stage. So there is not a clear answer here. Without being a supporter of Michael Bloomberg's, I don't find there to be a strong ideological case to say the guy in third place shouldn't be in the debates. Change my mind. I'm open to having my mind changed on this. David, can you explain in the context of your views on free speech, which content should not be allowed on social networks? Okay, so my view on this is basically law plus logic, okay? There are a lot of different views about when should content be removed from social networks. And oftentimes there is a total jumble of legal arguments, moral arguments, arguments that use the term free speech in a completely wrong way. So let's kind of lay out my perspective on this. My starting point is, unless the content is illegal, then it should in principle be allowed on, unless it falls under certain categories of behavior or speech that a social network as a private business should have the ability, and I would argue responsibility, to keep off of its network. So if the content is illegal, it should be pulled, period, no questions asked. Next, we get to stuff like targeted bullying and harassment of individuals. I don't want, if I were running a social network, I would not want my social network to be in any way associated with perpetuating these cycles of people who are attacked and targeted on the internet and then it bleeds over into their real lives. Sometimes people become suicidal. There are people who have actually taken their own lives because of bullying that was happening in great part online. So it can't be used as a tool for targeted harassment in that way. In the same way that if you follow someone around in real life, much in the same way that is taking place online, even if you're not stalking them per se, if you're constantly attacking them and insulting them and yelling things at them, you would be able to call the police and the police would tell that person, you've got to go. There is no legal issue with social networks saying that's not going to be the way that you can use this tool. That's number one. Number two, it is perfectly reasonable for social networks to say, even though it is not illegal to target people on the basis of their immutable characteristics, sometimes in membership in what in some states are called protected classes, we are not going to allow it on the platform. And again, if I was running a social network, I would not want to see the platform used to target individuals or to attack individuals on the basis of their religion, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, or whatever the case may be. I wouldn't allow it on my social network. If you don't like that, then you can go and either build a different social network or find a different one or lobby the social network to change those rules. But that's essentially my thinking. I don't think that there is any responsibility of a social network to block conspiracy articles or anything like that. I think once you start taking money to promote things like, for example, the wrong voting day via advertising, the way Facebook has been facing lately, I think that's a different question. But in principle, if you're posting some kind of conspiracy or fake news article as an individual, if it's not attacking or pushing bullying on individuals, if it's not attacking or harassing people on the basis of their membership in some protected class or immutable characteristic, I think that that's fine. I don't think that social networks should get involved in policing that, but those would be my parameters. Essentially, illegal content is not allowed. Targeted harassment, bullying, and encouragement of bullying, both online and in person against people, should not be allowed. And attacks on people that are either race-based, nationality, attacks on people with disabilities, for example, I wouldn't allow any of that stuff on my social network. Let me know what you think. We've got a great bonus show coming up for you today. Become a member instantly at joinpacman.com and you will get access just as instantly to the world famous bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.